Joining me, as always, my co-host, Gerald Goodridge. Please hit that like button. Please subscribe down below. It really helps out what we're trying to build. And Texas is trying to build a damn good football team. And let's jump right into it. Derrick Cooper, the recruitment and how it's going. So he was going to commit 2 days ago, guys, and he pushed it back to the 20th instead. He was seen wearing about 10 days before we thought he was going to decide Texas gear, all that decked out, talking to someone, and sources behind the scenes basically said, hey, yeah, he's interested, and they're starting to push. So now Texas is fully in the mix with Derrick Cooper, and he decides in less than a week. So, Gerald, what do you like about Derrick Cooper, and how do you think he would fit in that running back room?
Yeah, I've said it on this channel multiple times that like part of my concern about the Texas running back room as it exists right now is their lack of a second pitch, right? Where I feel like every running back does very similar things where it's very heavy inside zone, very bruiser, very thick bodied. And that's not necessarily what Derrick Cooper is. He can do some of that. I feel like he's an every down back in a lot of ways, but I also think he's got a little bit of the top end breakaway speed that I think the room is kind of missing right now. And so I think that's one of the things that he does. He's a playmaker. He's a guy who I think you could probably, as he grows a little bit, play on all 3-4 downs, right? Where he can, he can run, he can pass catch, and he can block. I think right now, as he comes in, even if he comes in next year and plays sparingly, I think he brings a little bit more explosiveness than what Texas has in the room right now. Because like I've said it multiple times, and it kind of started off with this, CJ Baxter, incredible running back, number one running back in his cycle at one point, but he's not necessarily the all state burner kind of guy. He's not the, turn on the Jets and go. That's not Trey Wisner. That's not Jared Gibson. That's not any of the guys in the room right now. And so for Texas to land a kid like Derrick Cooper, who, and I'll be real, like, if it's an NIL deal, great, right? We've said it before. We said it again. If Texas feels like the juice is worth the squeeze, then they're going to pay it, right? And so in this situation, they feel like it's worth the squeeze. And so that's for Texas a big, big deal. And so again, I think the biggest thing that he brings, one, add some more momentum, an elite player from Florida. Love getting another running back from Florida. Keep the ties in there. That's something that Chad Scott is a Florida guy, so has those ties as well. But gets an elite running back, gets a second pitch, and keeps those prongs in Florida. Love it all.
Yeah, I agree. And this is something, Texas has been striking out on the trail. KJ Edwards struck out with him. He's going to Texas A&M. Javion Osborne, we thought he was going to go to Michigan, ended up at Notre Dame. Guys like that, we just haven't been in on. And there's always been something to me of we haven't really pushed either. And I think that's what you're seeing with Derrick Cooper. You're seeing this final push here to get him to come to Texas. That is why he pushed this back. I think the 3 or 4 teams to look at. I think Florida State just thrown in there. I think it's going to come down to Miami, Georgia, Texas, and Ohio State. Texas and Ohio State have been pushing of late. And this is, like you said, I think this is a big NIL push. And for someone like this, I expect it to be. You're talking about a top 30 guy. When you look at the 247 composite, you're talking about the number 2 athlete in the country, according to the 247 composite, 6'1", 205 pounds, out of Chaminade, Florida. Really, really good football player, and a guy that I think could play day one here at Texas. I also think in the reality, and this is all reality, you're going to push 2 guys out with this move. One, at least in my opinion, 2 guys are probably going to end up transferring from this Texas team. Obviously, Trey Wisner and CJ Baxter could go to the NFL. I mean, CJ Baxter at this point isn't even cleared for contact, so it's hard for me to believe all of a sudden he's going to have a breakout year and want to go to the NFL. I think he sticks around. So that leaves you with a very crowded running back room if Derrick Cooper does join, which is unfortunate, but it is a very talented, very crowded room. And guess what? Competition helps out a lot. It creates these dynamic, dynastic programs, and that's what Texas wants. So he'd be a gigantic fit in this Texas running back room. And I completely agree with you. He's listed as an athlete because he's good, kind of just an all-around good football player. And he's kind of what CJ Baxter was before he got injured. Plus, you add more top-end speed to him. That's what I kind of see when I watch his game. We'll see if CJ Baxter can recover. I hope he can, because that room is missing it this year. But going forward, this guy would definitely bring it if he does join the Texas Longhorns.
Yeah, it's one of the things that we've talked about with the running back recruiting is that there was kind of going into this kind of news cycle a very high chance that all 5 scholarship running backs for Texas were back next year. Right? There's a very, very strong chance of that. And so that's part of the reason why I think running back recruiting has been a little weird. Same thing goes for wide receiver recruiting in some ways, that Texas is going to have very full room. So getting a guy like Derrick Cooper, you're probably right. 1 or 2 guys are probably going to need to go somewhere else. And I'm with you. I think CJ Baxter is probably here for 2 years. Trey Wisner has a lot. I think he feels like he has a lot left in the tank, and I'm not going to argue with the kid. So if he wants to go somewhere else and thinks he can be an RB1 there, if you've seen him on TikTok, he says he's like that, right? So like he's the guy who I think can really, if he wants to, go and find some other place to play, or he stays around at Texas and one of the other guys behind him transfers. I don't know what the look is for Texas in the future, but bringing in a kid like Derrick Cooper, again, I've said it before and I'll say it again, Texas needs another pitch in that room. And I think he's the kind of guy that can do that from day one.
And I think pushing for this type of player and not a Javion Osborne, a KJ Edwards, to me shows the concern of that room. I think Sark looks at that room and is like, we don't have that one guy here. We need that guy that, can get 25, 30 carries a game if it comes to it. Like, instead of, who's ever hot that night. That's kind of what we did last year, and it didn't work out. And I've said that. I've said we have to have a one guy, like your top one guy. We just don't have that. And I think Sark is making that clear with this push with Derrick Cooper, because he's whatever service you want to look at, he's either the number 1 or number 2 running back. So if you're making a push for that guy, he's looking at the room and saying, I don't have that here. I need that here. And it creates a really dynamic backfield as well. Like Diabell's in the class. Imagine Diabell and Derrick Cooper there. That's a very, very good 1-2 punch with Nick Townsend at the tight end position and the wide receivers on the outside. That's a very, very good offense to build on.
Yeah, and again, I think Texas is not going to want for skill players, but we've seen it before. Texas doesn't want to really go into the portal for a guy like this unless they absolutely have to, right? They would rather leave some of that portal stuff for the plug and play interior defensive lineman or those types of spots, where Texas would rather have a running back that they have on campus that they can develop in their own system, that can grow up with the group. And so I love this push, and I think, for Texas to, again, land a kid like Derrick Cooper. And again, we cannot overstate. And Texas landed a Samari Matthews from North Carolina, right? Landing a kid from Florida, continuing to widen the footprint. I don't think Texas will need to. Well, I say we'll need to go to Florida every year. Texas has done really well with running backs in Florida every year, but Texas doesn't need to get the entire class from the wide SEC footprint, but continuing those inroads in Florida, continuing those inroads in the Carolinas, in the Deep South, in Georgia, which will come up in just a second, right? Those things for Texas are huge, because they're going to do well in the state of Texas as long as they're competitive, right? They're going to do well in California as long as they're competitive. Being able to go into Florida, Georgia, the Carolinas, right? All of those places where there is elite talent at positions that, frankly, Texas and California don't produce as much, is a big win for Texas.
100%. If you can cherry pick 1 or 2 recruits a cycle in each of those states, you're doing a really good job. And you got that. You got a top 10 player out of North Carolina and Samari Matthews. You'll get one of the 2 to 3 best players out of the state of Florida and Derrick Cooper if you're able to land them. So, yeah, I completely agree. And when we talk about Tyler Atkinson, again, taking maybe the number 1 player out of the state of Georgia after you took one of the top 3 last year in Justice Terry. So completely agree. Expand the map as much as possible. And Texas has been able to do that. And I think that's also why some of these coaches were hired to do that. Kenny Baker, I think, is the reason you're able to do that. I think Chad Scott is the reason you're able to do that in the Carolinas, because he kind of recruits that area. That's why he was pretty successful at West Virginia. So overall, I completely agree with that. So that's a Derrick Cooper recruitment. He will be making his decision July 20th from those 5 schools. In my opinion, again, Florida State just thrown in there. I'd be absolutely shocked if he went there, but I think